if you want to support the show, any of the shows, either this or whichever show, I'm not on right now because this is just a blanket ad for all of them, and the website, you can go to bewareofspoilers.com. In the description for any of the episodes of Beware of Spoilers, there is the option to donate. If you don't want to donate that way, you can donate directly through the website. We do have that, mwpnews.com. And if you don't want to support that way, then going to mwpnews.com will help out because we have ads there. We don't want to keep it, where there's a lot of ads. There's a few ads. But the point is we want to make it so that way, we can sustain this for the long term. If people donate, we're never going to paywall anything, I don't think, as of right now. But if people, start donating, we'll start doing cooler and cooler stuff. Like donations are how we get to cover stuff like Tribeca and other, film festivals. And, we may be able to bring on more people to help out. So if you want to help out the show and you want more content from us, by all means, even just going and giving us a 5-star rating on Spotify helps out a lot. But that's it. That's the only ad we'll have on the podcast ever. But here's whatever podcast you're going to be listening to. Good morning and welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam. And we're here today to talk about episode 2 of WandaVision. As we go through, we're going to be doing this, in the lead up to Agatha. We're going to be talking about all the episodes of WandaVision, and then Multiverse of Madness the week before. So, we're on episode 2 now, and I think a lot of what I said last week still applies, somehow to a greater degree, which is weird to say. I feel like there's a lot of issues with this show, where it's like, again, that I think I gave a lot of, and maybe it was just me not remembering the show quite as well as I thought I did, where I was like, oh, well, maybe it was just people assigning stuff that wasn't really the case, and people just being like, oh, well, we're going to try and do the exact same thing. Like, oh, well, this is clearly trying to stop X, Y, and Z going forward, and, it's not like when you started out Iron Man back in 2008, you were like, and here's how we get to Thanos. I was just like, oh, maybe it's that. Maybe that's where the show was. And I don't think that that's the case now. I think the show is deliberate in its teasing. The show is, like, they didn't know when they set out to make this show that there was going to be a global pandemic and we were going to have nothing else to really talk about when this show came out. That wasn't something on the mind of the series creator. To that end, the show does tease a lot of things. Where it's like, there's one line in particular that does it. Like, the big thing in this show is Mephisto going to be there? Mephisto's going to be somehow involved, and he wasn't. It turns out he wasn't. We've watched the show in its entirety. I'm not concerned about, spoiling what comes down the line because the show is 3 years old at this point, but at no point during this were you, like, watching it now, we can't be like, oh, well, they're teasing Mephisto. So, like, the idea that, like, she's got the rabbit named Senor Scratchy, and then she has the line where it's like, someone says to her, I forgot who it was, maybe it was Dottie, says, like, the devil's in the details, and Agnes, who we now know as Agatha Harkness, says, that's not the only place he is. And it's like, oh, they're very clearly trying to set up a scenario in which people will try to fill in their own blanks and more or less, try to do that. Which is not a great way to really structure a show, because then what ends up happening is you're not talking about the content of the show, you're talking about the implications of the show beyond what we're watching. Which I think, on the other hand, does need to happen with this show, because more or less what this is them trying to have the show have wider implications, because it will lead directly into Multiverse of Madness, while also kind of being this small, like, sitcom homage. And this one, as I'm watching it now, feels like a sitcom. Like, this feels like a plot ripped directly out of My Favorite Martian, which is an old show with Bill Bixby back in, I want to say it was the late 50s, early 60s, about a Martian who strands himself on Earth, and this reporter ends up, if you've seen the movie with Christopher Lloyd, you know what I'm talking about. It's that, but, the original version of that. That's what this feels like, because that show, every episode, there was something going on with the fucking Martian that was malfunctioning, and then it was like, oh no, X, Y, and Z isn't working with my, with my technology or my anatomy, and now because of that, ABC is happening. And then it's like, okay, so that's what this feels like, where it's like Vision eats the gum, it gets stuck in his mechanics because he's not supposed to eat, and then it makes him drunk. So Wanda's got to cover for him. And I'm like, this feels like that exact plot. Which, okay, cool. Like, I get that. Again, my same issues apply to this episode as applied to the last episode. Beyond that, it doesn't feel like it is, it doesn't feel like it's a sitcom of that era. And again, I think part of the problem with this show is we have since had Kevin Can Fuck Himself. And Kevin Can Fuck Himself is essentially the same show, or Kevin Can F Himself. Like, whatever the official title is from AMC on that. Like, that show does this kind of exact same thing, where it's lampooning the traditional sitcom, because anytime he's there, it's like a sitcom. They're at a restaurant, it's filmed like a multicam sitcom. And then you get to the moments where she's alone, and it's shot like a crime drama. And when you have that in here, where it's like, again, the cracks in the facade of the world that Wanda has created are starting to show, rather than transitioning. And one of the things is, I think I understand why now a little bit more than I did before, because doing that would have telegraphed the quote-unquote twist that Wanda was the one behind all of this. Because at this point in the show, they're still playing it as a mystery, and they're playing it as, what's going on here? Is Wanda stuck in this town too? What happened here that's making her live out this reality? Is someone's watching it on, like, the first episode ends, someone's watching this on a TV. And it's like, okay, so someone is pulling the strings, is what it appears to be. We know later that, I believe that's, what's her name? That's Darcy. And then later on in this episode, we get the call out, like, Wanda, who's doing this? Wanda, can you hear me? Wanda, what's happening? And it's like, okay, so something is happening to Wanda instead of something Wanda is actively doing. Which is why you can't have the moments where, when the facade breaks, the best way to handle it for a show like this would be for Wanda to, for the facade to break and for it to go to 16:9. And for it to break the sitcom style of shooting. But a lot of times it doesn't do that. In this episode, all we get that really does that is we get the break of reality via things are coming in color. The helicopter, which we know is a drone sent in by Sword, and the arrival of and when Dottie, cracks the glass and cuts her hand, we got the blood in red, which is like starkly contrasting everything else being in black and white. It's a great kind of visual aesthetic for the show, and I think that works, but doing it properly would have telegraphed the fact that it is Wanda doing it. Because the minute that you do that and you break with the reality and you show that the cracks in the facade are showing, and you see Wanda having to be the one to force it back, like, you get that at the end of the episode when the beekeeper shows up, and again we know later on that that's a Sword agent who was sneaking in through the sewers. Like, it's a weird situation. And I think there's a lot of things in this show that work very well. Don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of things that do work well. I think that, like, there are a few great bits in this episode that are, like, really funny bits that I'm like, okay, that would have fit in if this show had come out when it did. Like, when in the era it's homaging, which is like late 50s, early 60s at this point. But still, it's like, I think that, like, for all that does work, there's a lot that just feels off. There's a lot in this show that just feels like, well, what, like, this doesn't, and it's the same issue with Lightyear, where it's like, this wouldn't happen on a sitcom of this era. And I get that it's because Wanda is the one influencing it, but if she's trying to keep up this facade that her life is a sitcom and that's kind of the cocoon she's in as she processes her grief, and we'll talk about that as we get toward the end of the show, like, that is kind of a weird place to put your characters. Because it's like, I don't think it's handled well enough to make it interesting. Especially as you are here at this point. And like I said, had I watched this initially and we got through these 2 episodes and this didn't have the Marvel Studios logo in front of it, I probably would have dropped the show. I probably would have stopped watching, because I was kind of like, you know, it's good. I appreciate what they're, like, the homages are cute, and it's like, but I see what they're doing. I get what the plan is. I understand what they're going for, and that's, you know, that's something. And I think that, you know, when the homage works, the homage works. But it's not worth the time sink at this point, which is, you know, this I think is the first example. It's the first real crack in the facade for what people would say. It's like, oh, the MCU is kind of, you know, fallen off. And or to use from the, you know, from what we've heard from Deadpool and Wolverine, you know, you're getting on at a little bit of a low point. The idea as you're watching this that he is, you know, that people are going to watch because it has the Marvel Studios logo in front of it, feels obvious in this show. And not in the, this is a slow burn, so people are going to stick with it. Because I don't think the underlying mystery here is that compelling. To the point that, like, if the mystery was compelling, you don't need to have all these red herrings for what it could possibly really be. And in order to misdirect what you know, misdirect the audience. Because if your underlying, you know, mystery is so engaging that you can just keep it kind of you can, you know, handle it. You don't need to sit here and be like, well, could it be Mephisto? Could it be, you know, what could be going on here? Like, it's a weird situation to intentionally put yourself in. I don't understand why that's something that they opted to do in this case. Besides the fact that it gives you a way to talk about the show that's not just talking about, like, well, they're doing kind of good homages to things that we already like. Like, they're doing kind of good homages to you know, sitcoms and stuff, so that's kind of cool. But, like, if that's it, and that's all that this is doing, then why am I tuning in every week and instead of, you know, just dump this out all at once? And I think that, like, the other issue is, it's like, and let's address the issue as it is right here. This show is meant to be Wanda coming to terms with the death of Vision and becoming who she is and becoming the Scarlet Witch. And that's what this show is. Okay, great, I get it. This show doesn't define that well enough to the point where I'm like, okay, if she becomes the Scarlet Witch, that's a problem because of X, Y, and Z. I never feel that, like, this is her, like, her becoming the Scarlet Witch at the end and defeating Agatha ends up feeling like a big hero moment instead of, like, I feel like one of the things that would have helped, Multiverse of Madness is, had that ended off and it's her very slowly feeling like think about, okay, we're gonna use Dune again because Dune is my favorite thing to go back to. Like, the scene where Paul in Dune Part 2 assumes the role of the Muad'Dib, and he decides at that point, like, we are going to become Harkonnens, we're going to believe our own hype, we're going to, you know, we're going to use what the Bene Gesserit have laid before us in terms of this prophecy to to take control of Arrakis, use the Fremen to defeat the Emperor, put me at the head of the Imperium, and then we'll see what happens from there. Like, the minute he does that and he goes into the War Council and he has that scene, it is, unless you're media illiterate, which is the case in a lot of people, and we'll talk about that. We're going to end up talking about that. I'm recording this before I see Twisters, but we're going to talk about that. Beware of spoilers later tonight from when I'm recording it, or yesterday from when you're listening. But, like, unless you're media illiterate, it is very clear in that moment that Paul is not the good guy. It's scored like a horror movie. Like, that scene of him going around and proving himself to be the Kwisatz Haderach to everyone is not meant to be a hero moment. And I think that's the big misfire of this show being what it is that Wanda has a hero arc in this show when she shouldn't. If this show ended off with her assuming the role of the Scarlet Witch and defeating Agatha that way, and it's like she's got to do something she doesn't want to do, and that's give into this power, the power of Chthon. Like, if that's what you do, that scene works so much better from beginning to end. Like, everything about that just ends up clicking a lot smoother. And then on top of that, too, when you get to Multiverse of Madness, it doesn't feel like a heel turn for the character to suddenly be like, oh, well, now she's a bad guy, where she's willing to rip apart the multiverse to find a universe where her kids are. It's like, if she gives in to Chthon there, like, that scene, like, a lot of what happens in Multiverse of Madness works a lot better. And I think that we're going to, as we go through this show, we're going to talk more and more about it. But this is where I am at the end of episode 2. Because, again, this is kind of going to be me thinking about this show and the implications of what came after. Because, really, if you look at the grand scheme of what we've had so far in the MCU, since, since we had that first, since Endgame, we haven't had a ton of setup payoff in the way that we did in phase, I wouldn't say phase 1, 2, and 3. I mean, yeah, let's say that, because we had a lot of, like, here's what we're setting up, here's what we're paying off, and it just carried through the entire show. That is kind of the weirdness of this, of where we are here, where it's like, thinking through, it's like, well, Kate Bishop makes a reappearance, and, we've had a recurring appearance from Helena, we had a recurring appearance from Val, Madam Hydra, because, like, even things like Secret Invasion and the Marvels make no sense together, no matter where it comes in continuity. Does the Marvels come first? Like, that makes no sense, because if that's the case, then, the Skrulls have a home on New Asgard. Does Secret Invasion come first? It's like, well, why didn't they just call Captain Marvel from the beginning, and that would have alleviated this whole Skrull issue? It doesn't make... It doesn't work right. And we haven't gotten a payoff. We're getting a payoff to some of the other movies and shows coming up with Captain America, but the only real direct setup payoff we've had so far, besides that, where there's, like, these characters showing up in other places, like, the only real direct one we've had is stuff that has come out of WandaVision. And I guess Ms. Marvel because of the Marvels, but looking at it, this is the worst handoff, I think, of what we've had so far, handoff project to project, where it's just, like, I believe I read somewhere that, like, no one had seen WandaVision when they were making this show, and it kind of shows. I do wonder if they had the overarching thing where, like, Wanda becomes the Scarlet Witch is kind of like the beginning and end of what they were told about it, and they were like, cool, she's the Scarlet Witch, here's what we're going to do with that. Like, it's just weird, is what it is. But it's... I don't know. We'll address it more as we go, and as we get closer and closer to Agatha. Hopefully Agatha can kind of set us up in a place. And again, I come back to what I said initially about it, where it's like, are we at a point where Agatha is just going to be bringing back Wanda? And if that's the case, was this whole circuitous route where we have multiple TV shows just getting us back to where we were with powered up versions of Wanda and Vision without an Infinity Stone in his forehead, like, is that a circuitous route worth taking? And so far, I would say no. So far, I would say there's not enough here to be like, this was a worthwhile excursion. I think we did a great job. It's a shame. But we'll wrap up there for today. Because I feel like you could have done Vision, like, and that's the thing too, we're going to talk about it, but I think the way they handle the death, like the way they handle White Vision versus Wanda's version of Vision in her head is so weirdly handled that I'm like, why would you even do it this way? Like, why was this the path you decided on would be the best way to handle this? Because it doesn't really make a ton of sense. Like, because it's we'll talk about when we get to it. Because we'll talk about it toward the end of the show. But we'll wrap up there for today. Our next episode will be on Monday. We're going to be doing our X-Men ranking. Josie will not be joining. Unfortunately, she has personal matters to attend to. And we're not going to, we're going to do my personal X-Men ranking next week, which will make it easier for me to talk about, because I have a feeling we're going to have we would have had differences of opinions in places that I don't want to, arguing we would have ended up with, like, on Exploring Hyperspace Lanes, where Andor is, like, third from the bottom, because I relented and let Josie put it wherever she wants. But we'll wrap up there for today, and until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.